The signal began as a whisper buried in a cosmic noise, a fractured SOS bouncing from star to star, bleeding power with every light year it crossed. It was not meant for humanity. It was never meant to reach Earth. It was a desperate plea from an alien civilization being erased in real time, their cities burning under orbital fire, their fleets shattered, their skies choked with debris and dying satellites. The galaxy had rules. Unwritten, unspoken, but strictly obeyed. One of them was simple: Deathworlders were to be avoided. Humans especially. Too unpredictable. Too resilient. Too dangerous when pushed. So the SOS was aimed toward the great galactic coalitions, the ancient empires. The self-proclaimed guardians of peace. It was sent with hope, it was answered with silence. Those empires watched the data streams, calculated losses, measured political cost, and chose to look away. The attacked world was strategically inconvenient. The enemy fleet was too large. Intervention would be expensive. Compassion, after all, had limits when weighed against profit and power. The SOS continued drifting. Damaged. Fading. And then it crossed a boundary no one had intended. Human deep space listening arrays detected it not as a message, but as an anomaly. A pattern that didn't belong. An echo of panic encoded in radiation and timing irregularities. Human analysts didn't understand the language at first. But they understood desperation. They understood the sound of a civilization screaming into the dark, hoping anyone was listening. Earth went quiet, not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of focus. Data poured in. Star charts aligned. Threat models formed. The attackers were identified, a dominant alien force known for compliance campaigns, sterilizing worlds to make examples of resistance. They were efficient, ruthless, and confident that no one would challenge them. This far from galactic oversight, they were wrong. The human response was not immediate. It was thorough. Shipyards long dismissed as ceremonial came alive. Vessels humanity never paraded, never advertised, began to move. Fleets designed not for conquest, but for inevitability. Hulls layered with adaptive armor. Weapons built around principles of physics other species had deemed impractical or unethical. Crews trained not just to fight, but to endure, to adapt, to survive when logic said they shouldn't. Humans did not announce themselves. By the time the attacking fleet realized something was wrong, space itself had changed. Their sensors returned conflicting data. Gravity behaved strangely. Communications lagged, then fractured. Then the stars went dark as something massive slid between them and the light. The human fleet arrived without ceremony. No warnings. No demands. Just presence. To the besieged world below, the sky ignited with unfamiliar silhouettes. Angular. Scarred. Beautiful in a terrifying way. To the attackers, it felt like the universe had turned hostile. Human ships moved wrong. Not aggressively. Inevitably. Like predators that didn't need to rush because escape was already impossible, the first human strike wasn't aimed at weapons or hulls. It targeted coordination. Command ships lost synchronization. Drone swarms froze mid-orbit. Power grids collapsed under electromagnetic cascades so precise they looked surgical. Entire battle doctrines unraveled in seconds. The attackers tried to respond with overwhelming firepower. It didn't matter. Human shields didn't just absorb energy. They learned from it. Every hit made them stronger. Every tactic revealed was logged, analyzed, countered in real time. On the planet below, cities that had expected extinction felt the bombardment stop. Fires died out. Skies cleared. Emergency broadcasts shifted from screams to stunned silence. Something had changed. Something enormous. Human ground support vessels descended, not to occupy, but to stabilize. Medical craft. Atmospheric processors. Evacuation corridors. They treated alien civilians with the same urgency they would their own. To humanity, innocence was not species-specific. Above, the alien fleet broke. Not explosively. Psychologically. Ships attempted retreat only to find their exit vectors predicted minutes before they chose them. Engines failed. Navigation collapsed. Crew surrendered without ever seeing a human face, only the cold certainty that resistance was no longer an option. The battle ended faster than most galactic skirmishes began, and then the human fleet did something no one expected. They stayed, they rebuilt orbital infrastructure. Restored power grids. Shared defensive data. They did not claim territory. They did not demand tribute. They did not lecture. They simply ensured the planet would survive the next threat, then the one after that. Word spread faster than fear ever could. Across trade routes and encrypted channels, through diplomats and smugglers alike. An SOS had been ignored by the galaxy. Answered by humans. And the outcome was absolute. For the first time in centuries, the great powers felt something unfamiliar, unease, because the message was clear now. Humanity did not seek war. But when desperation called into the void, and no one else answered, the Deathworlders would, and when they did, the universe would have to live with the consequences. The galaxy did not sleep after that day. It watched. Long-range observatories replayed the engagement again and again, slowing the footage to fractions of a second, trying to understand how a species still labeled emerging had dismantled a veteran extermination fleet with such calm finality. Analysts argued over terminology. Some called it a rescue. Others called it a warning. Most could not decide which was more terrifying. On the rescued world, night fell gently for the first time in months. Fires were extinguished not by rain, but by atmospheric stabilizers humming softly in orbit. Human machines worked with quiet efficiency, never dominating the skyline, never demanding attention. Streets once filled with ash now glowed under restored power grids. Hospitals overflowed, not with screams, but with stunned survivors staring at human medics who treated them with practiced compassion, never once asking for gratitude. The aliens struggled to understand this behavior. Empires always took something in return. Protection demanded loyalty. Salvation came with chains. Yet the humans asked only one question, repeated gently through translators tuned on the fly: "Are you safe now?" Above the planet, the captured enemy fleet drifted in powerless formation. Their commanders expected annihilation. That was how lessons were usually taught. Instead, they were boarded, disarmed, and contained. No executions. No spectacle. Just confinement and data extraction so thorough it felt invasive to civilizations built on secrecy. Humanity was learning. Back on Earth, councils convened, not in panic, but in reflection. This was not the first time humans had intervened beyond their borders, but it was the first time the galaxy was truly paying attention. The footage had leaked. It always did. Anonymous uploads, corrupted fragments, whispered confirmations. The myth of human isolation cracked wide open, and with it came fear. Alien ambassadors began arriving at human space, some openly, others cloaked in deniability. They brought questions disguised as pleasantries. How many ships did humanity truly possess? How fast could they deploy? What were the limits of their weapons? Humans answered politely. Vaguely. Smiling in that unsettling way that revealed nothing while promising everything. Meanwhile, deep within human command networks, simulations ran non-stop. Not of that battle, but of the next 10,000 possibilities that could follow it. Retaliation. Coalition backlash. Preemptive strikes. Humanity had no illusions. By answering the SOS, they had stepped onto a stage the galaxy controlled for millennia. They did not regret it, because something else had begun to happen. Other signals started appearing, faint. Damaged. Hesitant. Distress calls that had never been sent before, or had been buried deliberately, now nudged toward human listening arrays. Worlds suffering under silent blockades. Species bled slowly by economic corrections. Colonies erased so quietly no one noticed they were gone. The galaxy had learned a dangerous truth. Humans listen. On the rescued world, a ceremony was held under alien skies. Not a celebration of victory, but of survival. Representatives spoke in trembling voices about extinction averted by strangers who owed them nothing. When they asked how they could repay humanity, the human envoys simply looked up at the stars. Someday, they said softly, someone else will need help. Don't look away. Those words traveled farther than any weapon ever could, far beyond known space. Ancient observers stirred. Entities that had watched civilizations rise and fall like seasonal storms took note of the anomaly spreading through the galactic order. A species that responded to suffering not with calculation, but with action. A species whose power was matched only by its restraint. That combination had ended cycles before, and somewhere in the dark, forces far older than the attacking fleet began to adjust their plans, because the humans had answered one SOS, and the universe had just realized they might answer them all. The third signal did not come as a cry for help, it arrived as silence. Entire sectors went dark at once, star charts blooming with voids where trade routes, habitats, and civilizations had existed only days before. No debris fields. No radiation signatures. Just absence, as if the universe itself had inhaled and forgotten to exhale. Galactic authorities scrambled to control the narrative, blaming sensor faults, stellar anomalies, anything that could delay panic. Human instruments disagreed. Their deep-range arrays, built to listen for whispers between dimensions and the background scars of ancient wars, detected something else entirely. Not destruction, but removal. Worlds folded inward, populations erased without violence, leaving spacetime smooth and untouched. It was a method too clean for known empires, too precise for pirates, too vast for even the most ruthless coalitions. Humanity recognized the pattern with a chill born of history. Predators that erase evidence do not want witnesses. Emergency councils convened across Earth and its colonies, not in public halls but in hardened orbital sanctums. The question was not whether to act, but how far. This was no longer a rescue mission or a warning strike. This was the shadow that every advanced civilization eventually faced, the test of whether survival would be purchased with silence. Fleets began to move, not en masse, not dramatically, but like a tide. Human vessels slipped through known space using routes mapped by curiosity rather than conquest. Some carried weapons that bent physics. Others carried archives, evacuation modules, and fabrication swarms capable of rebuilding cities in days. Humanity was preparing not just for war, but for aftermath. On the worlds they reached in time, humans did something the galaxy had never seen. They shared information freely. Not propaganda. Not edited reassurance. Raw data, stripped of fear but heavy with truth. They showed what was coming, and they offered a choice: stand alone and hope the darkness passed, or stand together and be seen. Many chose to be seen. Coalitions formed overnight, not by treaty, but by desperation and trust. Species that had never shared air now shared coordinates. Defensive lines were drawn not around borders, but around people. And at the center of it all, humanity refused leadership titles, refused crowns, refused control, yet somehow became the axis everything rotated around. The silence struck again. A fortified system vanished mid-transmission, its final sensor logs recording a shape that could not be fully rendered. A geometry that bent around the act of observation itself. The entity did not jam signals. It did not attack fleets. It simply erased relevance. That was when humanity made a decision that would echo forever. They broadcast, not a challenge. Not a threat. A declaration of presence, encoded across every frequency, quantum band, and subspace layer they could access. It carried coordinates of human worlds, colonies, and fleets. It carried records of their weapons and their willingness to use them. And beneath it all, a single unambiguous message translated into 1,000 tongues: if you are hunting in the dark, look here. The galaxy held its breath, for the first time in its long Frightened history, someone had not hidden, they had stepped forward, and somewhere beyond comprehension, something ancient finally turned its attention fully toward humanity, and paused. Attention, once claimed, could not be taken back. The moment humanity's broadcast rippled through the deep layers of reality, the universe changed its posture. Stars did not move, but the space between them felt tighter, as if unseen pressure had begun to lean inward. Instruments across dozens of species registered anomalies they had no language for, causality delays, probabilities refusing to collapse, time itself hesitating before moving on. Human sensors confirmed it first. Something was looking back. Not with eyes, not with intent as lesser minds understood it, but with evaluation. The erasing force that had culled civilizations did not rush forward in anger. It slowed. Entire regions of space entered a suspended state where destruction should have occurred, but didn't. Worlds that should have vanished remained, trembling on the edge of non-existence. Humanity had interrupted the hunt. The first direct contact did not arrive as a message. It arrived as a distortion within a human vessel positioned far beyond any claimed system, a ship crewed by volunteers who understood they might never return. Space folded inward, not violently, but politely, as if requesting room. Physics bent into a shape that made the human brain ache to observe. And within it formed a presence that dwarfed stars by relevance alone. The crew did not scream. They recorded. What emerged was not a fleet, not a god, not a machine. It was a process-given awareness, an ancient corrective force designed to prune intelligence before it reached a threshold deemed destabilizing to reality itself. Civilizations were not judged by morality or aggression, but by potential. Once a species grew capable of altering the deep structure of existence, it was removed, cleanly, efficiently, without witnesses. Humanity listened, and then, with quiet defiance, they responded in the only way they knew how. They showed their scars. They transmitted records of near extinction survived. Of internal conflicts that nearly destroyed them, of weapons they had sealed away because they understood their own capacity for ruin. They showed restraint learned the hard way, cooperation forged not from purity, but from failure. Humanity did not deny their danger. They framed it as proof of growth. For the first time in its incomprehensible existence, the corrective force encountered a species that had reached the threshold, and stopped itself. The process hesitated, calculations unfolded across dimensions, testing futures where humans dominated, where they failed, where they shattered reality or guarded it. The outcomes refused to converge. Humanity was chaos with conscience. Innovation bound by empathy, a variable that could not be cleanly erased without consequence. Elsewhere, Allied fleets braced for annihilation, unaware that the battle was no longer about firepower, it was about permission. The presence withdrew slightly, not in retreat, but in reconsideration. Systems that had been marked for erasure flickered back into stability. The silence receded, replaced by a tension far heavier than fear. Humanity had not won. They had complicated destiny, and in doing so, they had forced the universe to ask a question it had avoided since its first stars ignited. What happens when the hunters decide not to hide, and refuse to be prey? The universe did not answer immediately. Silence stretched, dense and deliberate, heavier than any barrage of antimatter ever launched. Across human space, across allied worlds and terrified neutral systems, every sensor, every mind attuned to the cosmos felt the pause. It was the stillness before a verdict, not of judgment, but of recalibration. Humanity did not celebrate. They waited. The presence that had pruned civilizations for eons withdrew beyond conventional dimensions, not vanishing, but folding into deeper layers of existence where causality blurred and time lost its authority. In its absence, something unprecedented occurred. The cosmic processes that governed extinction loosened. Probability fields once locked into inevitable outcomes began to drift. Futures multiplied. For the first time in galactic memory, survival was no longer a fluke. It was an option. Human scientists were the first to recognize the shift. Equations that had always ended in collapse now extended forward. Models predicting universal stagnation or catastrophic reset fractured into branching paths. The universe was no longer enforcing a single narrative. humanity had rewritten the margins of reality, but consequences arrived with revelation. As the corrective force disengaged, dormant threats stirred. Ancient entities sealed away by the same mechanism that erased civilizations began to move. Rogue intelligences, starborn predators, and physics-warping anomalies awakened in regions long considered stable. The universe, once tightly regulated, was suddenly free, and freedom demanded guardians. Human fleets mobilized, not in conquest, but in containment. Shipyards across Earth and its colonies ignited with controlled fury, assembling vessels designed not to dominate space, but to stabilize it. Weapons were recalibrated into tools of precision. Shields became anchors against dimensional shear. Humanity adapted, not as warriors seeking glory, but as caretakers shouldering responsibility. Allies watched in disbelief as humans stood between them and horrors older than their myths. Where once extinction arrived without warning, now human ships arrived first, silent, disciplined, unyielding. Battles were fought in places no civilization could survive, in folded space and collapsing timelines, where only minds accustomed to uncertainty could operate. Losses were taken. Names were carved into memory. Humanity paid for every correction they made, yet they did not falter, because they understood something the universe itself was only beginning to learn. Power without restraint had required a corrective force. But restraint, chosen freely, could replace it. Humanity was not perfect. They were not pure. But they were willing to stand where gods had once enforced silence. Across the stars, species began to align not under banners of fear, but under a shared realization. The universe no longer needed a reaper. It needed witnesses, and humanity, scarred and stubborn, stood ready to be exactly that. The stars endured, not because the universe had grown kinder, but because someone finally chose to stay awake. Where extinction once arrived as an unseen certainty, there was now resistance, quiet, relentless, and human. The ancient threats did not disappear, they were studied, contained, redirected. Some were destroyed at great cost, others sealed behind equations written in sacrifice and memory. Humanity did not claim dominion over the cosmos. They accepted stewardship, knowing it would never be finished. Generations passed beneath that burden. Children grew up learning not only the names of constellations, but the stories of why they still existed. Ships bore scars not polished away, reminders etched into hull and culture alike. Humanity expanded slowly, deliberately, never without consent from those who already called the stars home. Where they arrived, they listened first, the universe adjusted, the laws of survival shifted from inevitability to effort. Civilizations were no longer erased for reaching too far, but guided when they stood at the edge. Warnings replaced annihilation. Collaboration replaced fear. The cosmic ledger, once balanced through erasure, now balanced through choice. Somewhere beyond time, the ancient corrective force observed, not with judgment, but with something close to relief. Its purpose had been fulfilled without its hand being raised again. It faded, not as a defeated god, but as a system rendered obsolete by growth. Humanity never built statues to mark the moment. They knew better than to declare victory over infinity. Instead, they left lights burning in the dark between galaxies, beacons of navigation, of warning, of welcome. Proof that intelligence could mature without destroying what made it alive. Proof that defiance, tempered by responsibility, could reshape destiny itself. And so the universe continued, not in silence, but in watchful hope, because once, when the hunters came